Hi Reddit, this is my first time posting here. I honestly don't know where else to turn. My name's Marvin, and I guess you could say I've always been the shadow in my own family. My younger brother, Alex, was the star, the golden child. He could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I don't know if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, but that's what growing up felt like for me. When I was a kid, I'd bring home straight A's, and my mom would glance at my report card and say, "That's nice, honey." Meanwhile, Alex would get a participation trophy for his third-grade soccer team, and she'd clear her schedule to throw a party. It didn't stop there. When I graduated top of my class in high school, the celebration was a quiet dinner at home. When Alex barely scraped by, they threw him a backyard barbecue and invited half the neighborhood. It hurt, but I tried not to let it get to me. I worked hard to build a life of my own, something stable and meaningful. I went to college on a scholarship, graduated with honors, and got a job in engineering right out of school. My girlfriend, Linda, and I met during my sophomore year, and she was my rock through it all. 5 years together, and I was finally ready to propose. I thought I was creating the kind of life my parents could finally respect. I thought wrong. About a month ago, Linda sat me down and said we needed to talk. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell she'd been crying. My stomach sank because I knew it wasn't going to be good, but I never expected what came next. "I'm pregnant," she said. I froze. I should have been overjoyed, but something in her tone made me pause. "Marvin, it's not yours. It's Alex's." It felt like the air had been punched out of me. My brother? Alex? The man who spent his entire life overshadowing me had now stolen the one person I thought was mine. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there numb, as she tried to explain. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she cried. "It was a mistake. We were drunk, and it only happened once." But she was lying. I could see it in her eyes, the way her voice cracked just a little too much. It wasn't just once. And even if it was, that didn't make it hurt any less. I asked her how long she'd been hiding this, and she broke down completely. Apparently, she found out a few weeks ago but didn't have the courage to tell me until now. The baby was due in 6 months. My brother knew too. He'd been calling her, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Neither of them thought I deserved to know until she was too far along to keep it a secret. I left that night. I couldn't stay in the apartment we shared. I crashed at a friend's place, but even there, I couldn't escape the betrayal. My mind raced, replaying every moment over the last year, wondering how I missed the signs. I thought we were happy. I thought I was building something real. The next day, I went to confront Alex. I didn't care if it turned into a screaming match or worse. I needed answers. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. My hands were trembling, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't call ahead or even think about what I was going to say. All I knew was that Alex needed to face me. He needed to look me in the eye and explain how he could destroy my life without a second thought. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was parked out front. Typical Alex, always hanging around mom and dad's like he still lived there. I stormed up to the door and barely knocked before letting myself in. The familiar scent of my mother's lavender candles hit me, but this time, it made me feel sick. Alex was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. When he saw me, his face shifted from surprise to unease. He knew why I was there. "Marv," he started, but I cut him off. Don't you dare try to act like this is no big deal." My voice was shaking, but the anger was boiling over. "Look man, You slept with Linda," I spat, my voice rising. "You, my own brother, slept with my fiancée. And now there's a baby? Are you kidding me?" He stood up, putting his hands out like he was trying to calm a wild animal. "It wasn't planned, okay? It just happened. It just happened. That's all you've got." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't accidentally sleep with her, Alex. That doesn't just happen." He had the audacity to look annoyed, like I was overreacting. "Look, it wasn't supposed to go this far. I was drunk, she was drunk. We didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me?" My voice cracked. "Do you even hear yourself right now? You've been stabbing me in the back my entire life, and now you've completely wrecked it. But sure, you didn't mean to. That makes everything okay, right?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what you want me to say, Marvin. I screwed up. I know that. But Linda came on to me too. Don't you dare try to pin this on her, I snapped. She's got her share of blame, but you knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't care. Before he could respond, our mom walked in, wearing her usual apron, wiping her hands on a dish towel. What's all this yelling about? She asked, her tone already exasperated. I turned to her, my heart pounding. Ask your precious Alex. He got Linda pregnant. Her eyes widened as she looked between us, clearly caught off guard. What? Marvin, that can't be true. Oh, it's true, I said bitterly. Your golden boy here has been sneaking around with my fiancée. But I'm sure you'll find a way to excuse it, right? It's just another one of his mistakes. Marvin, don't be dramatic, she said, her voice sharp now. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. Dramatic. I repeated, my voice rising again. He betrayed me. He's been sleeping with Linda behind my back. How is that a misunderstanding? Mom turned to Alex, her hands on her hips. Is this true, Alex? He looked at the floor, mumbling, yeah, it's true. Her face fell, but instead of the outrage I expected, she sighed. Oh, Alex. What were you thinking? What was he thinking? I shouted. That's all you have to say? Marvin, calm down, she said, her tone scolding. This isn't the way to handle things. Alex made a mistake, but he's still your brother. He's not my brother, I said coldly. Not anymore. Before she could respond, my dad came in, looking confused. What's all the commotion about? Mom glanced at me nervously, like she didn't want him involved. It's nothing, dear. Just a misunderstanding. I didn't care. I turned to him and said, Alex slept with Linda, Dad. And now she's pregnant with his child. My dad froze, his face a mix of shock and anger. He looked at Alex, who still couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Is this true? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Alex nodded, barely managing a yes. Dad's face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might finally put Alex in his place. But then he sighed and shook his head. This is a mess. Marvin, I know you're upset, but you can't just storm in here yelling. My jaw dropped. Are you serious right now? You're taking his side. I'm not taking sides, Dad said, exasperated. I'm saying this is a family issue, and we need to handle it as a family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was the same story all over again. Alex screws up, and I'm the one expected to let it slide for the sake of family. You know what? Forget it, I said, turning toward the door. You all deserve each other. Marvin, wait, Mom called after me. Don't do anything rash. But I didn't stop. I walked out of that house and out of their lives. For good this time, walking out of my parents' house, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a weird kind of relief. It was like I'd finally seen them all for who they really were. For years, I'd told myself that if I just worked harder, if I just became someone they couldn't ignore, they'd see my worth. But in that moment, I realized I'd been fighting a losing battle. I drove aimlessly for hours, too wound up to go back to my friend's place. Every time I replayed the confrontation in my head, I felt the anger surge again. My own parents had basically told me to suck it up for the sake of family. Alex had wrecked my life, and all they could do was sigh and call it a mistake. Eventually, I parked at a nearby park and just sat there, staring out at the empty playground. My phone buzzed, a text from Linda. I debated ignoring it, but finally opened it. Marvin, please come home. We need to talk. Talk? Talk about what? How she and Alex had been sneaking around behind my back. How she was carrying my brother's child. I didn't even bother responding. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The next morning, I made the decision. I was done. Done with Linda. Done with Alex. Done with my parents. It wasn't a rash choice, it was survival. I couldn't keep pretending that these people cared about me. I went back to the apartment when I knew Linda would be at work. Packing up my things felt surreal. I moved robotically, stuffing clothes into garbage bags and throwing my books into boxes. Every now and then I'd come across something, a picture of us at a college football game, the anniversary card she wrote last year, and my chest would tighten. I couldn't believe how much of a lie it had all been. Before I left, I wrote a short note and left it on the kitchen counter. Linda, you made your choice. I can't be a part of this anymore. Marvin. I left my key next to the note and walked out, knowing I'd never come back. The next few weeks were a blur. I crashed at my friend Tom's place while I figured out my next move. Tom was a solid guy. He didn't push me to talk, but he was there when I needed to vent. He kept a six-pack in the fridge and a spare blanket on the couch, and honestly, that was all I needed. Linda tried calling me almost every day. She left voicemail after voicemail, apologizing, begging me to come back, saying we could figure this out. But the trust was gone. Once you see someone's true colors, you can't unsee them. Alex, of course, didn't bother reaching out. He probably figured I'd come crawling back eventually, like I always had. That wasn't happening. Not this time. Then came the messages from my parents. First, it was my mom. "Marvin, I know you're upset, but you need to forgive Alex. He's your brother. Family is all we have in the end." Then my dad chimed in. "Son, I know Alex made a mistake, but holding a grudge won't solve anything. Come home so we can work this out." They just didn't get it. It wasn't about a grudge. It was about self-respect. I couldn't keep letting them walk all over me and expect me to smile through it. About a month later, I found an apartment in the city. It wasn't anything fancy, a small one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a view of the alley, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. No Alex. No Linda. No parents telling me to be the bigger person. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office. It wasn't healthy, but it kept me busy. The nights were the hardest, though. That's when the loneliness crept in. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. How the people I loved most could betray me so completely. One night, I got an unexpected call from my Aunt Carla, my mom's sister. She was the only family member who had ever really treated me like I mattered. I hesitated before answering, worried she'd be calling to defend Alex too. But her first words caught me off guard. "Marvin, I just heard what happened. Are you okay?" For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone actually cared. I told her everything: Linda, Alex, the baby, my parents' reaction. She listened without interrupting, letting me pour out all the anger and hurt I'd been holding inside. When I was done, she said something that stuck with me. "Marvin, you don't owe them anything. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away." Hearing those words was like a weight lifting off my chest. For so long, I'd felt trapped by my family, by this unspoken obligation to keep the peace. But Carla was right. I didn't owe them anything. I stopped responding to my parents' texts after that. I blocked Linda's number. I started seeing a therapist to work through everything, and slowly, I began to rebuild. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like it was mine to decide. A few weeks after I blocked Linda, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, holding a casserole dish like we were in some sitcom. She smiled, but I could see the tension in her eyes. "Marvin, we need to talk," she said, stepping inside before I could say no. I crossed my arms, not bothering to hide my frustration. "What's there to talk about, Mom? You've made it clear whose side you're on." She sighed, setting the dish on my tiny kitchen counter. "It's not about sides. We're family. We can't just fall apart over one mistake." "One mistake?" I said, my voice rising. "Alex destroyed my relationship, and you want me to act like it's no big deal? Alex feels terrible." "Does he?" "Because he hasn't even apologized," I snapped. She hesitated, clearly unprepared for that. "Marvin, he's your brother. You can't just shut him out forever." I shook my head, feeling the anger boil up again. "Watch me." She stayed a little longer, pleading with me to come to a family dinner and work things out. I stood my ground, telling her I needed space. When she finally left, I felt drained but resolute. For once, I wasn't letting them guilt me into anything. About a week after my mom's visit, I got an email from Linda. I hadn't heard from her since blocking her number, so seeing her name in my inbox made my chest tighten. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Subject: "Please read this, Marvin. Marvin. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm so sorry for everything. What I did was wrong, and I can't take it back, but I need you to know I never stopped loving you. What happened with Alex was a mistake, one I'll regret for the rest of my life. I wish I could undo the pain I caused. You were my everything, and I threw it away. I don't expect you to forgive me, but if there's even a chance we can talk, I'm begging you to give me that. Linda. I stared at the email for what felt like hours, my emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to respond, to let her explain or even just vent my anger. But another part of me knew better. Words couldn't fix what she'd done. I deleted the email and blocked her address. It was time to let go for good. Not long after Linda's email, Alex decided to make his move. I was leaving work one evening when I saw him leaning against my car, hands in his pockets, looking as smug as ever. "Marvin," he said when he saw me. I ignored him and kept walking, but he stepped in front of me. "Can we talk?" I stared at him, my jaw tight. "What could you possibly have to say, Alex? That you're sorry? That it was a mistake? I've heard it all already." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know I messed up, okay? But this is getting ridiculous. We're family." "Family?" I laughed bitterly. "You didn't think about family when you were sleeping with Linda. It wasn't like that." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't stand here and try to justify what you did. You made your choices. Now live with them." He looked frustrated, but I wasn't giving him an inch. "You're seriously going to throw away everything over this?" he asked. "No, Alex," I said coldly. "You threw it away." I stepped around him, got in my car, and drove off without looking back. A few days later, I got a text from my dad. "Dad, your mom made lasagna. Family dinner at 7. You should come." I ignored it. I wasn't in the mood to play happy family. But around 6:30, guilt got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I showed up. The moment I walked in, I regretted it. Alex was already there, sitting smugly at the table. My parents looked relieved to see me, like my arrival was some kind of victory. "Marvin," my mom said with a hopeful smile. "I'm so glad you came." I sat down silently, refusing to look at Alex. The tension in the room was suffocating. My dad cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. "So Marvin, how's work?" "Fine," I muttered. We ate in awkward silence for a while, but of course, Alex couldn't leave it alone. "You know, Marvin," he said, "I've been trying to talk to you. It'd be nice if you didn't keep shutting me out." I put my fork down, my appetite gone. "You don't get to play the victim, Alex. You did this. Not me." "Okay, that's enough," my mom interjected, her voice sharp. "We're here to work things out, not argue." I laughed bitterly. "Work things out? You mean pretend like none of this happened so Alex can feel better about himself?" "That's not fair," she said. "He's apologized." "No, he hasn't," I cut in. "And even if he did, it wouldn't matter." "Marvin, we're family," my dad said firmly. "You can't just walk away from that." "Watch me," I said, standing up. "You want to sweep this under the rug? Fine. But I'm done pretending any of this is okay." Without another word, I walked out. Behind me, I could hear my mom calling my name, but I didn't stop. That was the last time I set foot in that house. After the disaster at dinner, I realized I was done trying to explain myself to people who didn't care to listen. My family had made their priorities clear, and I wasn't one of them. It hurt, but it was also freeing in a strange way. I didn't need their approval anymore, and I certainly didn't need their guilt trips. The days that followed were quiet but heavy. I threw myself into work, keeping my mind occupied with deadlines and projects. It was easier than sitting with my thoughts. Tom, my friend and temporary roommate, noticed my mood but didn't press me. He'd throw on a movie or order takeout and just be there, which was exactly what I needed. One evening, as we sat on his couch, he finally spoke up. "Marv, you ever think about leaving this town? Starting fresh somewhere else?" I shrugged. "I've thought about it, but it feels drastic. Like running away." "Sometimes running away is the smart thing to do," he said, cracking open a beer. "It's not like you've got much tying you here anymore." He wasn't wrong. My job, my apartment, my family, it all felt like dead weight. The idea of leaving stirred something in me, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to make that leap. A week later, Linda found a new way to worm back into my life. I came home from work to find her waiting outside my building. She looked different, more tired, maybe even a little defeated. "Marvin," she said softly as I approached. I stopped in my tracks. "What are you doing here?" "Please, I just want to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I need to explain. I crossed my arms. You've already explained enough. She looked down, her hands twisting nervously. I just wanted to tell you that I'm keeping the baby. I thought you should know. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even considered what she might do, but hearing her say it out loud made everything feel real. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice cold. Because I don't want you to hear it from someone else, she said, tears welling in her eyes. And because I still care about you, Marvin. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. If you cared about me, you wouldn't have done what you did. You made your choice, Linda. Now you have to live with it. She didn't say anything else, just nodded and walked away. I stood there for a long time after she left, trying to process everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. Linda's words kept playing in my head, along with Tom's suggestion about leaving town. Maybe he was right. Maybe staying here, surrounded by reminders of what I'd lost, was only making things worse. I started researching cities, looking for jobs and apartments. Seattle caught my eye. It was far enough away to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that I wouldn't feel completely unmoored. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The next day, I told Tom about my plan. Seattle, huh? He said, grinning. That's a big move. You sure you're ready for that? I think so, I said. I need to get out of here. Start over. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. Good for you, man. You deserve a clean slate. I spent the next few weeks tying up loose ends. I gave notice at work and my apartment, sold most of my furniture, and started applying for jobs in Seattle. It was scary, but it also felt like the first step toward reclaiming my life. My parents tried to reach out a few times during that period, but I ignored them. I didn't want to hear their excuses or their pleas to stay. They'd made their choice, just like Linda and Alex had. The night before I left, I sat on Tom's couch with a packed duffel bag at my feet. He handed me a beer and raised his own in a toast. To Marvin, he said. Here's to leaving the past behind and finding something better. I clinked my bottle against his, a small smile on my face. Here's to that. The drive to Seattle was long but peaceful. I listened to music, stopped at diners along the way, and let the miles roll by. With each passing hour, I felt lighter, like I was shedding the weight of everything I'd been carrying. When I finally arrived, I checked into a modest apartment I'd rented sight unseen. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Starting over in Seattle was harder than I expected, but it was exactly what I needed. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of settling in, unpacking, finding a coffee shop I liked, and getting to know my new neighborhood. The city was nothing like the small town I'd left behind, but that was part of the appeal. I landed a job as a project manager at a mid-sized engineering firm. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, and the people were friendly. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward. Evenings were the hardest, though. I'd sit in my apartment, staring at the bare walls, wondering if I'd made the right choice. There was no family drama, no lingering ghosts from my past, but there was also no one to share my victories or struggles with. It was lonely, but it was a clean loneliness, one I could grow from. About 3 months into my new life, I met Elise. It was a Sunday morning, and I was in line at the farmer's market, waiting to buy fresh strawberries. The vendor was chatting with the woman in front of me, a petite redhead with a bright smile and a contagious laugh. She glanced back at me and noticed the basket of vegetables I was holding. "You cook?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Trying to," I said with a sheepish grin. "Mostly failing." She laughed, a light, musical sound. "Start with the basics. You can't mess up roasted vegetables. Just olive oil, salt, pepper, and toss them in the oven. Is that your expert advice?" I teased. "Absolutely," she said, grabbing her strawberries. "And if it doesn't work, don't blame me." I smiled as she walked away, but something about the exchange stuck with me. The following week, I ran into her again, this time at a bookstore downtown. She was browsing the travel section, flipping through a guidebook to Japan. "Planning a trip?" I asked, unable to stop myself. She looked up surprised, then smiled when she recognized me. "Hey, vegetable guy. And yes, someday. It's on my bucket list." "Elise," she said, holding out her hand. "Marvin," I replied, shaking it. We spent the next half hour talking about places we wanted to visit and books we loved. When she left, she scribbled her number on the back of my receipt. "Text me if you ever need more cooking tips," she said with a wink. Elise and I started seeing each other casually, grabbing coffee, exploring the city, and yes, cooking. She had this energy about her, like she saw life as one big adventure. It was contagious. At first, I was hesitant to let her in. My wounds from Linda and Alex were still fresh, and I wasn't sure I was ready for anything serious. But Elise didn't push. She just showed up day after day, with her kindness and warmth, slowly chipping away at the walls I'd built around myself. One night, we were sitting on the couch in her apartment, watching an old black and white movie. She turned to me, her expression soft. "Marvin, you're allowed to be happy again, you know." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd felt like happiness was something I didn't deserve, something other people got to have, but not me. Hearing Elise say it out loud made me realize how much I'd been holding myself back. Over the next few months, my life started to feel full again. Work was steady, my apartment finally felt like home, and Elise became a constant in my life. She wasn't just a distraction from the past, she was someone I could see a future with. The best part? She didn't just bring light into my life. She helped me rediscover the light I'd thought I'd lost. Then, out of nowhere, Alex called. The moment I saw Alex's name flash on my phone, my stomach churned. For months, I'd managed to keep him and the rest of my family out of my life. I debated ignoring the call, but curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Marvin," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. "What do you want, Alex?" I asked flatly. There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought he'd hang up. But then he sighed. "I messed up. Big time." "Yeah," I said, bitterness creeping into my tone. "I'm aware. It's not just about Linda," he said quickly. "She left me, man. Took the baby and moved back to her parents' place. I haven't seen my kid in weeks." For a second, I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated. This was the bed he made, and now he had to lie in it. But another part of me, the one that still remembered every childhood memory we shared, felt an unexpected pang of pity. "And why are you calling me about it?" I finally asked. "Because I don't know who else to talk to," he admitted. "Mom and Dad are on my case about getting her back, but she won't even return my calls. I've screwed up everything, Marv." "You're right, you did," I said coldly. "And now you're expecting me to help you fix it? After everything you've done?" "No," he said quickly. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what I did to you. For taking Linda. For everything." The apology I'd waited months for felt hollow. Maybe because it came too late, or maybe because I didn't trust him enough to believe it was genuine. "I appreciate the apology, Alex," I said, my voice calm but distant. "But I don't think you're saying it for the right reasons. You're not sorry for hurting me, you're sorry because your life's falling apart." "Marvin." "I've moved on, Alex," I interrupted. "And I think you should focus on cleaning up your mess instead of dragging me back into it." There was silence on the other end before he muttered, "Yeah, okay. I get it. Good luck," I said and hung up without waiting for a reply. That night, Elise noticed something was off. We were having dinner, but I barely touched my food. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. "Alex called," I admitted. Her eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? What did he want?" "To apologize," I said, swirling my fork around my plate. "And to complain about how Linda left him." She leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Part of me wants to feel bad for him. But mostly, I'm just tired of all the drama. I don't want him in my life anymore." "Then you don't have to let him in," she said simply. It wasn't profound advice, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. I didn't owe Alex anything, not my sympathy, not my forgiveness, and certainly not a place in my life. The next morning, I blocked his number. This time, it felt final. Blocking Alex should have felt like closure, but it stirred up something unexpected, memories I hadn't thought about in years. Maybe it was his apology or just the fact that he was still clinging to our shared history, but suddenly, I couldn't stop replaying scenes from our childhood. Alex and I weren't always like this. When we were kids, there were moments when we got along, sneaking cookies from the jar, building forts in the backyard, or watching cartoons together on Saturday mornings. He was my little brother, and for a while, I actually felt protective of him. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it was the way our parents always favored him, or maybe it was his need to prove he was better than me. Whatever it was, the bond we had dissolved, replaced by years of resentment and rivalry. The memories weren't all bad though, and that's what made it harder. As much as I hated what Alex had done, there was a part of me that still wished things could have been different. A week later, my mom called from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but her message caught me off guard. "Marvin, I know you don't want to hear from me, but Alex is struggling. He's not himself. I'm worried about him. Please, if there's any way you can reach out. He's still your brother." Her voice cracked at the end, and for the first time, I wondered if there was more going on with Alex than I realized. Was he truly sorry, or was he just spiraling? Elise noticed the change in me. One evening, we sat on the couch, and she gently nudged me. "You've been quiet," she said. "Is this about Alex again?" I sighed, leaning back. "My mom thinks I should reach out to him. She says he's not doing well." Elise studied me for a moment. "Do you think she's right?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels like it's not my problem. But, he's still my brother." She nodded, her hand resting on mine. "You don't have to make a decision now. Just think about what feels right for you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Alex's call, my mom's message, and all the years of resentment that had built up between us. Was there a way to move forward, or was this just another ploy to pull me back into the chaos? By morning, I still didn't have an answer. But for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't as angry as I used to be. Maybe that was the first step. The decision to reach out to Alex wasn't easy. For days, I went back and forth, questioning whether it was worth reopening old wounds. Every time I thought about calling him, I'd hear his smug voice in my head, or worse, I'd picture Linda standing between us. But Elisa's words stayed with me. Think about what feels right for you. It wasn't about Alex or even my parents. It was about what I needed to move forward. I decided to drive back to my hometown one Saturday morning. The familiar streets felt smaller, almost suffocating. As I pulled up to my parents' house, memories of that disastrous family dinner flashed in my mind. This time, though, I wasn't here for them. Alex was staying in the guest room, according to my mom. I didn't bother letting her know I was coming. I didn't want another lecture or guilt trip. When I knocked on the door, Alex answered, his face pale and thinner than I remembered. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Marvin," he said, surprised. "Can we talk?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He hesitated but eventually stepped aside, letting me in. We sat in the living room, the same place we'd grown up watching TV and playing board games as kids. But now, the air between us felt heavy, weighed down by years of resentment and the wreckage of the last few months. "I didn't think you'd ever come back," Alex said, his voice low. "I wasn't planning to," I admitted. "But Mom called. She's worried about you." He let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she is. I've made a mess of everything." "Yeah," I said bluntly. "You have." He flinched but didn't argue. For the first time, I saw something in him I hadn't before, real regret. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Marv," he said, his voice cracking. "Linda's gone. The baby's gone. Mom and Dad don't look at me the same. I thought I had everything, but now, I've got nothing." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Do you even understand what you did to me, Alex? You didn't just betray me, you tore apart everything I'd built. And you didn't care until it all fell apart for you." "I know," he said quietly. "I know I can't fix it. I'm sorry, Marvin. I really am." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure if I believed him or if I even wanted to. But looking at him now, broken and lost, I realized something. His apology wouldn't change the past. It wouldn't erase the pain or rebuild the trust. But it wasn't about that anymore. It was about letting go. "I'm not saying I forgive you," I said finally. "But I'm done carrying all this anger. It's exhausting, and it's not helping anyone, especially me." He looked at me, surprised. "Does that mean?" "It means you need to get your life together, Alex," I said firmly. "Not for me, not for Mom or Dad, for yourself. I can't hold your hand anymore." He nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. As I drove back to Seattle that evening, I felt lighter. It wasn't a happy ending, and it wasn't reconciliation. But it was closure, the kind I hadn't realized I needed. Returning to Seattle felt different after seeing Alex. The weight I'd carried for months, though not gone, felt manageable for the first time. Letting go of the anger didn't mean forgetting what he'd done, but it freed me from the constant cycle of bitterness. Elise noticed the change right away. That evening, as we cooked dinner together, she kept glancing at me, her lips curled into a small smile. "What?" I asked, chopping vegetables. "You seem lighter," she said, leaning against the counter. I paused, thinking about her words. "I think I am," I admitted. She tilted her head, studying me. "Did something happen while you were gone?" "I talked to Alex," I said simply. Her eyes widened, but she didn't say anything, waiting for me to continue. "I told him I didn't forgive him, but I'm done letting him take up space in my head. It's not fixing anything. He apologized, again, but I don't think it's about trusting him or even rebuilding anything. I just needed to say my piece." She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around me. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud of myself too. Over the next few months, life started to feel normal, or at least my version of it. Work was steady, Elise and I grew closer, and I even started making new friends. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. One Saturday, Elise and I were walking through Pike Place Market when she stopped in front of a vendor selling leather journals. "You should get one," she said, picking up a small brown-bound book. I raised an eyebrow. "What for?" "To write," she said with a shrug. "About everything you've been through. You've got a story, Marvin. Maybe putting it on paper will help you figure out what's next." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I'm not much of a writer." "Doesn't matter," she said, slipping the journal into my hands. "Just try." That evening, I sat at my desk with the journal open in front of me. For a long time, I just stared at the blank page, unsure where to start. Finally, I wrote. "Sometimes life falls apart, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But piece by piece, you can build something new, something stronger." The words flowed easier after that. Writing wasn't about reliving the pain, it was about finding meaning in it. 2 months later, Elise and I were sitting in a small cafe when she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "Marvin, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "Do you ever think about what's next for us? Like the future?" I smiled, her question catching me off guard but warming me at the same time. "All the time," I said. "You're my future, Elise." Her cheeks flushed, and she squeezed my hand. "Good," she said softly. "Because I think we're building something amazing." Looking into her eyes, I realized she was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work was good, my relationship with Elise was growing stronger every day, and Seattle finally felt like home. I wasn't looking for surprises, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It started with a phone call from my mom. I'd kept her number unblocked after my trip to see Alex, but our communication had been minimal, just the occasional voicemail asking how I was doing. This time, she left a message I couldn't ignore. "Marvin, it's your mother. I know you've been trying to keep your distance, but something's happened. It's about Alex. Please call me." Her voice was strained, and for a moment, I considered deleting the message like I had so many others. But something in her tone nagged at me, so I dialed her number. She picked up on the first ring. "Marvin, thank you for calling," she said, relief evident in her voice. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "It's Alex," she said. He's in the hospital." My chest tightened. "What happened?" "He collapsed at work," she said, her voice shaking. "It's his heart. The doctors think it's stress-related, but they're running more tests." I didn't know what to say. Despite everything, the thought of Alex in a hospital bed sent a pang through me. He was my brother, no matter how much damage he'd done. "I thought you'd want to know," she added. "He's been asking about you." I told Elise about the call that evening. We were sitting on the couch, the TV playing in the background. "Are you going to see him?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels like I should. But another part wonders if it's just going to drag me back into all the drama." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Do what feels right, Marvin. But remember, seeing him doesn't mean you're forgiving him or forgetting what he did. Sometimes it's just about being there." The next day, I found myself driving back to my hometown. The hospital was smaller than I expected, tucked into a quiet neighborhood. I stopped at the front desk, and a nurse directed me to Alex's room. When I walked in, he was lying in the bed, hooked up to monitors, his face pale and drawn. He looked up when he saw me, surprise flickering across his face. "Marvin," he said, his voice weak. "Hey," I said, standing awkwardly by the door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he gestured to the chair by his bed. "Sit." I hesitated but finally crossed the room and sat down. "What happened?" I asked. He sighed. "Stress, they think. I've been pushing myself too hard, trying to fix everything." I studied him, searching for the smugness that used to drive me crazy. It wasn't there. He looked like a man who had hit rock bottom. "Mom said you've been asking about me," I said. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. "I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to see you. I wanted to thank you for what you said when you came to the house. It stuck with me." "Yeah," I said, skeptical. He nodded again. "I've been trying to turn things around. Got a therapist. Started being honest with myself about everything I've done." I didn't respond right away, letting his words hang in the air. "I'm not here to forgive you, Alex," I said finally. "But I hope you mean what you're saying. For your sake." "I do," he said, his voice steady. As I left the hospital, I felt a strange sense of calm. I didn't know if Alex would truly change, but that wasn't my responsibility anymore. For the first time, I felt like I could let go, not just of the anger, but of the weight of trying to fix what was broken. My life was moving forward, and I intended to keep it that way. After visiting Alex, I felt a sense of finality, not closure in the perfect sense, but acceptance. He was trying to rebuild, and while I couldn't trust him or offer forgiveness yet, I realized that wasn't my burden to carry. My focus had to remain on the life I was creating, not the one I'd left behind. When I got back to Seattle, Elise greeted me with a hug, her warmth grounding me in the present. "How was it?" she asked softly. "Hard," I admitted, setting my bag down. "But it needed to happen. He's trying, and I hope he gets there. But I can't be the one to help him." She nodded, her hand slipping into mine. "I'm proud of you, Marvin. It takes a lot to face something like that." Her words reassured me that I'd made the right decision, not just in seeing Alex, but in choosing to move forward with my own life. A few weeks later, Elise and I were sitting at our favorite coffee shop, sharing a quiet moment over lattes. She looked up from her cup, her eyes sparkling. "Marvin, I've been thinking," she said, a hint of nervousness in her tone. "About what?" I asked, curious. "About us," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I don't want to rush anything, but have you thought about where we're heading?" I set my cup down and took her hand. "Every day," I said honestly. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time, Elise. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." Her smile widened, and she leaned across the table to kiss me. "Good," she whispered. "Because I feel the same." Life didn't magically become perfect after that, but it felt solid, like the kind of life I'd been searching for all along. Alex and I kept our distance, exchanging the occasional text but nothing more. My parents continued to reach out, though I made it clear I wasn't ready to repair those relationships just yet. Through it all, Elise stood by me, her presence a reminder that I could build something better. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't defined by the betrayal anymore. I wasn't trapped by the past or trying to prove myself to people who didn't value me. I was free. Turning to Elise, I squeezed her hand. "I don't say this enough, but thank you for everything." She looked up at me, her eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me, Marvin. You're the one who made the choice to keep going, to rebuild. I'm just lucky I get to be part of it." As we stood there, watching the waves roll in, I realized she was right. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I had finally found peace. And that was more than enough.